And we are live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 6, 2023 Special Hybrid Planning Commission meeting. I'm Mike Murphy, the chair. Tonight's Hybrid Planning Commission meeting is being brought to you courtesy of Zoom. Welcome to all, and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, please have your microphones turned on for the roll.
Thank you. Chair Murphy.
Present.
Vice Chair Riggum.
Present.
Commissioner Rashiz.
Here.
Commissioner Gels.
Here.
Commissioner Boatsman. Here. Commissioner Bottazo.
Here.
And Commissioner Accuse.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. For this meeting, we continue to utilize the Zoom platform. I will do my best to recognize you in the order in which your hands are raised. After being recognized, you may ask questions or make whatever comments are appropriate, depending on what we're doing. The first item of business tonight is public appearances. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the commission about issues of concern. Deputy City Clerk, is there anyone who has signed up for appearances that wishes to address the commission? After last night's marathon session, I think all those people should be exhausted.
As of 4 p.m. this evening, we did not have anybody that requested to speak.
Oh, how shocking, shocking. Okay, since there are no appearances, we move on to regular business. The first item of regular business is to review and consider approving the November 20 special meeting minutes. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Adam and seconded by Carolyn. So is there any discussion beyond the what was noted on the correction that you sent out? Okay. Deb, please conduct a roll call vote.
Okay. Commissioner Accuse. One more time.
Aye.
Okay. Commissioner Bottazo.
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman.
Aye.
Commissioner Gels.
Aye.
Commissioner Rashiz.
Aye.
Vice Chair Riggum.
Aye.
And Chair Murphy.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, motion passes. Second item of regular business is the comp plan periodic review, housing element, and recent statewide legislation. A mouthful for sure. Welcome, Laura Hodgson, Senior Planner with the Washington State Department of Commerce. Laura, take it away.
Hello, thank you for having me here tonight. Let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see my screen? Yes, great. Hello, my name is Laura Hodgson. I'm a senior planner at the Department of Commerce in the Growth Management Services Unit. In my role, I provide technical assistance to jurisdictions as they update their comprehensive plans, specifically as they work on their housing elements. Thank you for letting me attend this evening to talk about the comprehensive plan updates and other legislative changes that were recently made for housing. With that, I'm pleased to introduce the Department of Commerce. Before I begin, at the Department of Commerce, we strengthen communities, and our agency touches every aspect of community and economic development, from infrastructure and small businesses to economic development and community facilities. Today, we'll be talking about the changes to the housing planning framework in Washington. But before we begin, I wanted to provide a little framework for why the legislature changed the way communities plan for housing and the regulations that they are to implement in their codes to help encourage more housing. One of the first key reasons why housing is such a big issue today is that we haven't produced enough housing to keep up with growth over the last decade. With the recession in the early 2010s, or around 2010, between 2008 and 2010, we produced hardly any housing. And it did not keep up with population growth and the lack of developers in the communities just has not kept up with our growth. Now we're starting to keep up with the demand for growth, but we have a large lack of underproduction in housing, particularly those housing types that are more affordable. And as those housing pressures have increased, more homeowners are cost burdened because incomes have not kept up with the costs of housing, which means that people don't have enough of income to spend on other things that they need and want because they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. The data we are seeing and hearing from communities across the state seems to validate that. With the survey from the Puget Sound Regional Council and the Department of Commerce, we conducted a survey statewide, and out of all top possible issues, including transportation and crime and safety and economics and climate, housing and homelessness were the top two issues in the statewide survey, ranking higher than any of the others, such as economic development, climate change, transportation, and public safety. So in 2021, Washington took its own steps to direct communities to better plan for housing by adopting House Bill 1220. In 2021, House Bill 1220 significantly changed the growth management goal from its softer language of encourage affordable housing to its stronger language of plan for and accommodate. With this new language, it directs local governments to take more action to achieve their housing needs within the role that they are currently able to do. It doesn't require them to build the housing, but it does require them to take the steps that they're able to do within the land use and regulatory framework and the authorities given to them to support more housing in their communities that's more affordable. As part of House Bill 1220, it also directed the Department of Commerce to develop projected housing needs and to develop these broken down by income bracket, saying what housing is needed for people based on the incomes that they earn so that we can have housing that is affordable to residents of our state. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but in addition to that, it also directed local communities to strengthen the way that they plan for housing. It asked local governments to use these numbers that were produced by Commerce and identify sufficient land capacity for all housing needs. For the first time, this will take into account not just that you have a piece of land that you can build a unit on, but what type of housing that will produce and who can then afford that housing, so that we're meeting the housing needs of all ranges of people in our communities. It also described what make adequate provisions for all economic segments means. That was a previous requirement, and the legislature detailed that that meant to document the barriers to creating the affordable housing that we need in our communities and an action plan to achieve that housing availability. Again, not to build the housing, but to do what was within the control of the local government to encourage more affordable housing. And the legislature also for the first time recognized that planning has had an impact in producing racially disparate impacts in our community. And whether that's through redlining, through exclusionary zoning, or other practices, with the understanding that it is not only planning that has led to those racially disparate impacts, but it did play a part, and therefore communities should take an active role in beginning to undo those impacts. Commerce has developed guidance for implementing all of these new changes, as well as the projected housing needs numbers. Those projected housing needs numbers look like 1.1 million new homes over the next 20 years for the state as a whole. Now, putting that in context, we have about 3 million homes right now, so it's a big increase that is needed. But what is even more important to take under consideration is that it's a shift in the way we plan for housing. To make sure that housing is affordable to everyone in Washington, we need to change the way we plan for housing and plan for the housing types that people can afford. And what that means is that, as this graphic shows, is that to accommodate and make sure that we have housing for our lowest income residents, that we provide of the ability for that type of housing that is more affordable, which typically happens in the form of apartments, multifamily housing, or attached housing types to be built in more areas. In addition to that, we also need 91,000 units of, or beds of emergency housing. If we do not start to change our trajectory of how much affordable housing is built in the future. So that's another piece to keep in mind. Again, it means to allow that type of housing to be built, not necessarily to build it. So what does that look like in the context of Mercer Island? Well, Mercer Island is obviously in King County, and we developed our projected housing needs numbers at a countywide level because that is the way that counties currently plan for population growth, and counties know best where to plan for new housing and new population growth within their communities. So we developed projected housing needs at the countywide level for the counties to then divide up and determine where that housing should go. King County went through a very intentional process of working with community stakeholders and an advisory committee to determine how the projected housing needs that came from Commerce should be divided. And it had 3 different frameworks that it evaluated. It evaluated option 1, which was focusing on new growth, where everyone planned for the same percentage of housing at each income bracket. So everybody planned for 20% of their housing or their population of their housing need in any one income bracket. Option 2 was everyone tries to get to the same goal. In the future year, so in 2044, everyone would end up with 20%, in this case, continuing the same logic pattern, 20% of their overall housing in an income bracket. That meant that the affordability of housing was spread uniformly across all jurisdictions. The King County didn't feel that that was either of those were an appropriate framework. So it looked at a third framework, which it called focused on new growth adjusted for local factors, and used one of the guiding frameworks that was developed by Commerce, which was option 1 and option 2, and created their own option, which adjusted where more affordable housing would go based on where there were currently less affordable housing options, fewer income restricted housing options, and a greater imbalance of low wage jobs and workers. And based on a multi-year process, they arrived at allocations of housing need from that countywide process. Again, the county decided with its local jurisdictions how to divide up those housing needs to local numbers, and the local housing needs that were decided collectively through this process for Mercer Island are shown here on this slide. These were recently just ratified with countywide planning policies. So this will be what the city will be working with to plan for. Again, as I mentioned, I'll probably be a broken record on this. Will probably be the last time I'll say this, but it means that the jurisdiction should strive to plan for and accommodate for these. That means making sure that there is the right zoning in place to allow this type of housing and this type of affordability of housing to happen within the extent that it's feasible to do so, and within the extent that, you know, private developers will come to the table. But it also means looking at the barriers to why that housing isn't being built currently, in addition to that, and developing an action plan and implementing strategies to remove the barriers to allowing this housing to happen. And I'll walk through what that means on these next few slides. So first, as I mentioned, that means that a jurisdiction needs to plan for the sufficient capacity of land for all of these different housing income needs. What this means is that at a minimum, a jurisdiction should include a table of these housing needs that I showed on the previous slide in their comprehensive plan, and show that there's capacity to meet these housing needs. And what this means is more affordable housing types will need to be allowed in order for there to show that there is land capacity for those housing needs. And if there's insufficient capacity for any type of housing need based on this analysis, the jurisdiction must implement the zoning changes to provide capacity with a comprehensive plan. So the existing growth management framework notes that regulations to show consistency of the comprehensive plan in zoning need to happen with the comprehensive plan. So that was already in place, and this just takes a different, it sheds a different light on that framework. So what this might mean in the case of most jurisdictions is that because housing at higher densities is often more affordable by design, both in construction and both in reduced household energy and transportation costs, most jurisdictions will probably find, unless you're a large city that has a lot of multifamily housing or zoned, that you probably don't have enough capacity for the lower income housing needs, and that you'll need to add land zone for more multifamily housing types. Inherently, if you would have on a quarter acre lot, 6 units versus 1 unit, the units on the lot with 6 units are inherently going to be more affordable than the 1 unit. So basic logic to kind of get to that point. But it also means that jurisdictions will need to look at infrastructure to see how they can support this additional housing. And there are some implications of that with the middle housing policy, but generally under the comprehensive plan framework, with any new growth, you're planning for the updated transportation that would need to be accommodate those new units, the utilities, and the other facilities such as parks and open space and fire and schools. But we also know that making sure that we allow certain types of housing in our jurisdictions will not mean that it gets built. So under the framework of 1220, the legislature also asks jurisdictions to look at what those barriers are that are preventing those more affordable housing types from being built. And what this looks like is evaluating if you are on track to meet those, if your community is on track to building those types of housing. Again, recognizing the city's not building, but the housing market as a whole is building those housing needs that are allocated through this process. And if not, determining what those barriers are to making sure that housing could be built, to making sure that developers are more likely to come into your city and build the housing that we recognize is needed both locally and regionally. So to do that, we've helped jurisdictions by providing a framework to walk through to evaluate what those barriers may be. Those barriers may be in the form of development regulations, so what you allow on a property and what those setbacks are, how many parking spaces you allow for a unit. It could be process obstacles such as permitting, the fees for impact fees for a project, the approval process, how many public meetings you have to go to, if any. It could be limited land availability and environmental constraints, and it, of course, is probably also funding gaps. So to evaluate what these barriers are, we recommend that jurisdictions look at their code, evaluate their existing permitting processes, compare themselves to other neighboring jurisdictions, interview developers, and just talk with their staff and review what might be those barriers. And then document those, as well as develop strategies and actions that identify how to remove those barriers moving forward. And this is consistent with the Vision 2050, the policies for the Puget Sound Regional Council and King County itself. So it's the nesting hierarchy that requires this look. And again, all of this is to make sure that we're, as a jurisdiction, every jurisdiction is removing the barriers to address this housing crisis that everybody is feeling. In addition to this framework, again, I mentioned that local jurisdictions, whether intentionally or not, have led to some racially disparate impacts in most jurisdictions. And what this means is that some people don't have the same access to housing, not necessarily based on the race, but could be based on the race. And we recommend that jurisdictions to evaluate and meet the intent of the statute, follow a 5-step process to determine how they can begin to undo these impacts by revising their policies and regulations to allow a more equitable framework. What this involves is understanding who in the community might be impacted by these disparate impacts, understanding what the data says about your jurisdiction, and we have data available for every city and county in the state with some of this data that you can use in your comprehensive plan. And then we recommend evaluating your policies in your comprehensive plan and seeing how well does do the existing policies accommodate the housing needs? Are there policies that benefit some and burden others? Or does the policy contribute to displacement or exclusion? And based on the review of those policies, you can then revise them at this point, because this is the point when you'll be doing so, and then take the next step. But before I move on to that next step, I do recommend that you use this framework. We do recommend that you use this framework to evaluate all policies, not just in your housing element, because your policies in your transportation element and your capital facilities element, your utilities element have a big impact on where and how housing can be built. And undoing these past impacts that we see in our communities it can only be done if we really evaluate the lens of all of the policies in a comprehensive plan. And then there's a lot of text on this slide, but the summary of the slide is based on how you evaluate and update your policies to begin to make sure that housing is more accessible to everyone in your community. There are lots of ways to take that into account and to begin to implement that with regulations. You can do that by increasing affordable housing production, shown on the left, by preserving existing affordable housing, by protecting existing households, and by coordinating the benefits of housing across all groups. We have a lot more information in our guidance on this, but all this to say is how you address racially disparate impacts, exclusion, and displacement in your community is customizable based on what you find in your community, what you hear in your community, and by what your community vision is. So in summary, your comprehensive plan will use the allocation of housing needs from the countywide numbers, document that, evaluate the zoning in your community to make sure that you are accommodating the types of housing that will potentially meet these housing needs in the future, planning for the infrastructure that additional housing will need, identifying the barriers to affordable housing being produced in your community, and coming up with the actions to address and remove those barriers. Beginning to revise your policies and regulations to address exclusionary zoning and those disparate impacts that we talked about. Exclusionary zoning has been linked to racially disparate impacts. So allowing more types of housing will help to remove those disparities. And then again, revising your policies and regulations to address those racially disparate impacts, exclusion, and displacement. So we recognize it's a lot of work, but if you look at it through the lens of these steps in a way and walk through our guidance, we are confident that you'll be able to do this work over the next year, and we are also here to provide technical assistance and support. With that, I would like to pause if there are any questions before I move into an overview of the recent legislative changes, including House Bill 1110 and 1337, as well as a quick summary of a few other bills that may be of interest.
Chris.
Yeah, it's all very helpful. I appreciate the overview. Can we get these slides? I'd like to have access to them.
Yes, I believe I sent them to Allison just before the meeting, but I will circle back.
She'll get them to us.
She'll be able to share.
Great.
Kate.
Hi, thank you so much for the good presentation. It's good information. I'm wondering, in terms of barriers, this seems like it's kind of I don't know if you're familiar with King County's stream of equity concept. We're trying more to address barriers at the beginning of the stream instead of end of stream. This seems like a very end of the stream approach. And I'm just wondering how macroeconomic factors are playing into this. If the state is not going to allow for rent control, how are you going to keep housing affordable? What are the options for cities to consider in order to make sure that rents don't go through the roof? Because right now it's just completely unchecked. And you know, someone's paying the same rent for a 1 bedroom as someone is paying a mortgage for a 3 bedroom house. And that just doesn't seem fair. That seems like a pretty big barrier to me. So
Yeah.
how should a city address those factors?
Those are great factors and very important factors to address in housing affordability. And those are some of the factors that I think local governments can do at the local authority. I know Tacoma recently passed rental regulations that are, I think, some of the more forward-looking in the state. So a local government can take the initiative to adopt regulations and enforcement measures that curtail some of the market influences that we see going on. And we have a lot of different avenues that jurisdictions can take, including restricting rent increases and things like that. To the extent that I think now I'm going to have to refer to Dave to correct me if I'm wrong, but there are tools that local governments can use, and I'm going to have to go back to the guidance to check on what those are. But there are some tools available, and the legislature is actively working on that right now to see what other tools, both to allow local governments, but also as a statewide level to do that. And they're actively having conversations. The Senate Housing Committee just had a presentation from the Washington State Housing Finance Commission and Commerce on that topic specifically. So they're actively working through that. And I expect there to probably be a bill on that this session.
Thank you.
Carolyn.
You mentioned, Laura, that if we didn't build enough, if there wasn't enough affordable housing being built, that there would be a requirement for a certain number of emergency beds. And I didn't understand what that meant. Could you clarify that a little bit, please?
Yes, that's a very good question. So as we projected what our future housing needs were for all income brackets, including emergency housing, we had to make an estimate or a projection of how much housing at various affordability levels we would have and how that would impact our future homelessness. We could have either assumed that we have all of the affordable housing we will ever need in 20 years, and therefore our emergency housing needs would be much lower than that 91,000 units or beds that we mentioned. But we also know that to achieve our affordable housing needs, as we've projected from the state, is going to be very, very difficult. We need significant federal, state, local investments. We need a lot more builders to come to the table. We need a lot of everything. So given that it is unlikely that we will be able to achieve, 150,000 units of 0 to 30% housing in 20 years, we projected our emergency housing needs with the understanding that if we go on our current trajectory of producing housing that is generally less affordable and unaffordable to many of our residents, then so many of our residents are going to be at risk of homelessness. And what that leads to is needing, if we're on our current trajectory, 91,000 beds of emergency housing. Again, this is for people who are, one paycheck away from not being able to pay their bill, and then might need, emergency housing for 2 nights in between, one lease and the next, or somebody who, is couch surfing to have that opportunity. It is a staggering number, and hopefully one that will lower as we work towards allowing more affordable housing. But at our current trajectory, that's what it looks like based on best available projections. And we have a full methodology on how we projected that online, and I can point you to that if you're interested in looking at all the details of the nitty-gritty numbers.
Thank you.
Laura, I have a question. Is there anything that takes into account the basic fact that land on Mercer Island is just too damned expensive?
We recognize that affordability of housing is going to be very difficult in jurisdictions such as Mercer Island, and therefore the achievement of housing needs is not something that we're expecting jurisdictions to meet. We do expect them to jurisdictions to do with it. Again, what I said was within the control of what they can do. And in the case of Mercer Island, it might need to be being very creative in how you can accommodate and plan for future housing. And it probably will mean that in the case of Mercer Island, you may not be able to, get any new housing that is in a certain income bracket, but doing what you can within the means that are possible and coming up with creative solutions is the directive to helping all of us achieve our housing needs. Recognizing that land costs are very hard, but hopefully in combination with certain incentives, certain state and or federal or local funding sources, creative development scenarios and opportunities, the dedication of public lands, that might be possible in some ways to achieve and produce some of this housing that is needed, but recognizing that it's more difficult in jurisdictions such as Mercer Island.
Any other questions at this point? Seeing done, on to your next
All right, thank you.
part.
So a lot of you have heard about 1110. HB 1110 was passed because of our, as I mentioned before, unprecedented housing crisis, the lack of housing choice. You can either live in a multifamily unit apartment building, or you can live in a single family unit. There isn't really much in between. The need to achieve our increased housing production goals and our housing affordability goals, and just the desire to have a wider variety of housing options, recognizing that higher densities are generally more affordable. So 1110 defines middle housing as buildings that are compatible in scale, form, character with single-family homes and contain 2 or more attached, stacked or clustered homes, including duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, townhomes, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. With 1110, the state directed jurisdictions of various sizes and or geographies to allow a certain number of these middle housing units on every lot to encourage and support our need for more affordable housing. In the case of Mercer Island, you are have been directed to allow middle housing consistent with the bill because your population is 25,000, over 25,000. So you are considered, based on the legislation, a tier 2 city. And what that means is that the city must allow 6 of 9 middle housing types on in 2 of those units on all lots, and within a quarter mile of transit, 4 units, middle housing units on a lot, and everywhere allow up to 4 or allow 4 units if one of those units is affordable. So it was kind of the state's way of directing jurisdictions to take more progressive steps to encourage more affordable housing. What that means, as I mentioned in the case of Mercer Island, since you're tier 2, is to allow the 6 of the 9 middle housing types on all lots within the jurisdiction. It also means that there are other certain requirements that will need to be met with middle housing. And I have my colleague Dave Wasaki here, who's able to answer more detailed questions I'm not able to answer at the end of this presentation, but those include requirements to limit or not require parking within, based on certain sizes, to not have standards that are more strict with regard to design review or design standards than single family homes. And all of this would need to be done within 6 months of the periodic update, which means for Mercer Island, June 30th of 2025. To help jurisdictions with this, we have several guidance projects that we developed last session, including objective standards to help review middle housing, as well as a performer tool to understand where more middle housing will happen. But more importantly, we are currently developing a model ordinance and user's guide to help walk jurisdictions through the decisions that they are able to make as the flexibilities that they have and the lack of flexibilities that they have as they work to adopt regulations to be consistent with this state law. We're have a public comment open through today. Although Dave has said if you give him any comments tomorrow, Dave Osaki, who's leading this work, he will accept them and turn in our public comment session. But we've gotten hundreds of comments, and we'll be incorporating those into our model ordinance, which will be finalized in January, so that local governments can then use that information, use that framework to walk through a process to develop their own either custom ordinance or decide to use our model ordinance to allow regulations consistent with this state law. I would want to point out that middle housing capacity, if you are using it, we do recommend that those regulations be completed with a comprehensive plan because of other state statutes which say that your land capacity analysis needs to, and the regulations to show land capacity are adopted with your comprehensive plan. So something to keep in mind. Let's see here. Your city does have a grant to do this work. So with that, we also have staff to provide technical assistance as you work through this process, both our consultant and our existing staff to provide support as you have questions and work through this. In addition to 1110, all cities in the state and all counties that within urban growth areas need to allow 2 accessory dwelling units on every lot. So again, every lot within the jurisdiction needs to allow 2 accessory dwelling units. And I'll talk in a minute about how that overlaps with 1110, because there are some overlaps with the requirement for how many units to allow on a lot. In addition to allowing the requirement to allow 2 units on every lot, jurisdictions may not require owner occupancy. They may not prohibit the individual sale of the units, not necessarily the land, but the unit themselves. That's allowing for potential more affordable options within the jurisdiction. And a few other requirements here. I'm not going to walk through every single one because it was a very prescriptive bill. But one thing to point out is that the jurisdiction will also need to update its impact fees because for accessory dwelling units, jurisdictions may not charge more than 50% of the impact fee that's required for a principal unit, with the objective of trying to make accessory dwelling units easier to build and potentially more affordable housing option within jurisdictions. So what does this look like in light of the fact that you have 2 overlapping bills that tell you that you need to allow a certain number of units on a lot? In the case of Mercer Island, you must allow 2 ADUs on all lots in zones that allow single-family homes and allow at least 6 of the 9 types of middle housing to achieve the unit count. So a property owner or builder may develop in accordance with the ADU regulations, build 2 ADUs, the 1110 regulations, either the 2 units or 4 if one is affordable or 4 within a quarter mile of transit, or middle and ADUs as allowed by the city. So this overlap of HB 1337 and 1110 has some, the jurisdiction has some leeway in how it implements that. Or the property owner can do nothing. And again, that's probably going to be the case on a lot of the properties moving forward. Yes, there'll probably be a lot of development for 1337 and 1110 throughout the state, but there's probably also not going to be a lot of development as a result of it. We've seen in Minneapolis that even with the allowance of allowing 4 units on every property, there hasn't been a lot of uptake. So it really will depend on the market and the ability and the interest of every property owner. For number 3, where there's that overlap of how many units to allow, a city can determine if ADUs stack or can be added to the middle housing unit count. And the best way to explain this is where a city must allow for 4 units per lot for middle housing. It's easier to do this demonstration with 4 units. It may allow ADUs to count towards the 4, or a city may allow the ADUs to not count towards the 4 units, and therefore you can do a 4-plex plus 2 ADUs. Again, this illustration gets a little more complicated with the 2, but that's the concept. Additionally, there are a few other bills that were passed in 2023 because it was the year of housing and the legislature recognized that they want to encourage as much affordable housing as possible. And so as part of that, jurisdictions will also need to implement impact fees that are proportional. So based on the size and or impact of the unit, impact fees need to be proportional. So a unit that's smaller or has less impacts would theoretically have to pay less of an impact fee. Jurisdictions also have to allow for unit lot subdivisions, which means that they can subdivide their lots based on the middle housing. They have to allow clear and objective design standards. So less discretionary review, more clear objective process so that an administrator at the city can determine whether or not a application or permit is consistent with the regulations. Also allow affordable housing to be developed on religiously owned properties to a greater density than other places. And then, of course, in 2025, there'll also be some permitting requirements. There are a few other bills here. I'm not going to go through each one unless you have specific questions, but a few other updates to keep in mind. So your planning staff will be very busy and probably be bringing a lot of things to you for review. But for your information, this is things that will be coming down the pipeline. And with that, I'd just like to close with information about our resources. We have guidance documents and videos about all of the housing element requirements that I talked about. So if you would like more detail on that, those are there. I can also point you to the right page if you have a specific question with something. We have a lot of middle housing resources. We have ADU guidance. We have a summary of these new laws that were passed. So if you'd like more detail than a one-liner, that's there. And we also have some videos about why we need more housing and how we will accommodate more of that housing in our jurisdiction, as well as our public opinion survey online. And with that, I'm able to take questions, and I will also ask Dave Osaki to be on standby for any middle housing questions that I'm not able to answer, since he's the expert on that, and I don't want to speak incorrectly.
Great, welcome, Dave. Laura, thank you very much. That was a great overview, and I think those resources are going to get a lot of use. So, do we have any more questions after hearing that part of the presentation? Chris?
I'm just intrigued in terms of the house with 2 ADUs. I mean, under the middle housing bill, can it, though, that satisfy its requirement? I mean, you said it was complicated. I guess, is there any simple way to explain that scenario?
So I think, well, Dave Osaki, I'm with the Department of Commerce and I'm working on middle housing. So I guess the simplest way to explain this, and I'm not sure this is going to be simple, so I apologize. You, as a jurisdiction or any jurisdiction that's subject to the requirements of the House Bill for accessory dwelling units, has to pass codes that allow for, let's just use the scenario you talked about, a single family dwelling with 2 ADUs. So let's pretend House Bill 1110 didn't even exist, but you as a jurisdiction would still need to pass a bill or codes at the local level that provided for meeting the accessory dwelling unit requirements of House Bill 1337, a house up to 2 dwelling units, accessory dwelling units. So what House Bill 1110 does is it identifies 9 middle housing types. And Laura went through them all, and I'll try to remember them all. So we'll see how it goes. Duplex, triplex, fourplex, fiveplex, sixplex. There's 9 different types. But a single family dwelling is not a middle housing type. So to answer your question, a single family house with an ADU does not meet the requirements of House Bill 1110. Okay. You would need a middle housing. You would need a middle housing building type like a duplex.
Like a duplex. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing no hands. Laura, Dave, anything else for us that we should know before you sign off?
Just from my standpoint, we've just gone through a 30-day comment period on our draft middle housing ordinances and our draft user guide. That comment period concluded today, but as Laura said, Mercer Island gets an extra day if you want to provide some comments. But I'll tell you right now, we've got over at least 400 comments plus. And so we here at Commerce will be going through those comments and working towards publication of a final model ordinance about the third week of January. But our technical assistance doesn't end there. So we'll be available to provide assistance to local governments, not only on middle housing or ADUs, but also on the array of comprehensive plan items that Laura talked about.
And great, thank you. Okay, Laura, I think you guys are free to go.
All right, thank you so much. And again, let us know if you have any further questions or need us to come back on any topic, or point you in the right direction if you want to reference the guidance on anything. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
you.
I'm sure we'll be asking for more help.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our third item of regular business is the comp plan periodic review upcoming schedule. And Adam Zach, senior planner, will take us through that. Adam?
Thanks. Yeah, let me share my screen. All right. So I wanted to, to follow on to the presentation that you just saw, I wanted to check in with you all, give you an update of where we're going in the next year. Now you have an impression of the housing work that's ahead of us. Within that, our comprehensive plan periodic review is due at the end of next year, by December 31st of 2024. And we're going to work towards getting that adopted with some time to spare. So let's take a look at where we're heading here. First off, the scope of work for this project was adopted in 2022 by resolution, and then amended this summer to incorporate some of the work for House Bill 1220 and the housing work that we have left to do. The scope of work overall is intended to be a surgical approach to updating the comprehensive plan, really with the exception of a couple of key components. The scope of work is intended to really target in on those, the GMA requirements, and not necessarily do a full-scale rewrite of the comprehensive plan. And that the scope of work is aiming for adoption in the summer of 24 to get this done in time for that December 31st deadline. And within that scope of work, there were some tasks outlining some public participation studies and reports. We've already completed some of them. These first three, the economic development workshop and survey, so that public outreach, the economic analysis, and the housing needs assessment have already been completed. And then these final four pieces are still yet to be completed. They're coming up very soon. There's the land capacity analysis supplement. So that's going to be a study that looks at those housing needs that Laura was presenting on, that our housing target disaggregated by affordability level. We're going to look at the land capacity to accommodate that housing need in that land capacity analysis supplement. And then the racially disparate impacts report, again, based on the Commerce guidance, we'll have a report prepared that looks at those potential impacts and analyzes our policies for potential amendments. Both of those, we're planning to bring those forward to the City Council in January, in advance of kind of kicking off our kind of larger housing work. Then there's also some housing public outreach that we'll be doing following those reports. And this includes, we're planning to send some online, or create an online tool to gather some feedback on our housing approaches, and then also our housing open house toward closer to the end of your review process. So we'll have a comprehensive plan open house that focuses on economic development, that new economic development element that we've been working on, and some of the other pieces of our comp plan update. And then in terms of the elements, so our comprehensive plan has, we're updating 5 elements and adopting a new economic development element. The land use element, transportation, utilities, capital facilities, and economic development have all reached the public review draft phase. So we've already gone through those with the group, and those are out for public comment now. And we'll be checking back in on those after we get public input at the open house. And you'll have an opportunity to touch on these elements again before going to public hearing during what we're calling our Planning Commission tune-up meeting. And then that leaves just the housing element for us to work on coming up. And we're planning for the housing work group that was formed a while ago to take up the housing element starting in January. So that will be similar to the process that we used for the economic development element. But because of the timelines, we'll have to be a little bit more expeditious in executing that. There's also some other tasks that were included in the scope of work. Probably one of the bigger things that we haven't touched on yet is the creation of a new parks zone. So the council wanted us to establish a new zone for parks during the comprehensive plan update. We'll be bringing that forward soon. And then we have, I mentioned before, the Planning Commission Comprehensive Plan tune-up, where we'll come back and look at the draft of the comprehensive plan update after we've received public comments at our different public input stages. And then you'll be able to update those and make sure that they're consistent with those comments or that you've responded to those comments. And then we'll have the Planning Commission public hearing and recommendation. And then that'll lead into the City Council's review and adoption of the comp plan update. So there's a lot to pack into the first 6 months of 2024. We're planning to start with the park zone in January and February. And then in all likelihood, when we get to March, we'll need to go to 2 meetings a month if we're to make our to stay on schedule. And that's when we'll begin looking at the housing element. And then that'll lead into our comprehensive plan open houses that tune up in May, and then your public hearing and making a recommendation by June to keep us on schedule. You know, some of this is this is a draft schedule, and some of this may be subject to change as we continue to work forward or work through this. But that's a rough look at kind of where we're going in the next year. So I know that was a pretty quick overview, but I just wanted to get you guys up to speed on where we're heading, and I will take any questions at this time.
Kate.
Hi, yeah, thanks. That was a great overview, Adam. And I guess my one question is, we've got 2 new members who have a lot of expertise, and I'm wondering if there's going to be an opportunity for either of them to join the housing work group.
Well, so the housing work group, I suppose for our newer commissioners too, who weren't here when we put that together, the housing work group is composed of 3 city council members and 2 planning commission members, and they're going to work on drafting the housing element and the updates to the housing element. As currently constructed, it is 5 members, 3 from the city council and 2 from the planning commission. So if we wanted to, if somebody else wanted to serve, we would need to swap out the planning commission members.
Chris.
Yeah, what's the magic of the summer? I mean, I guess it seems like we're hurrying toward a deadline, which is 6 months before the legal deadline, and why not September? Or I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't. I just don't understand where that summer deadline came from.
Sure. So that was part of the initial scope of work and our schedule that was adopted for the project. And that was actually the original due date set in the Growth Management Act before it was extended. I believe it was in 22. And so we're sticking with that deadline as we update our schedule. It also, there's a legislative recess in August, and then the budget work would take place in September, October, November, and that tends to take up a lot of the bandwidth for working on these types of things. And so we're trying to keep it so that we get this adopted prior to working on the budget. That'll also give us a chance to make sure that we're budgeting for implementation.
Carolyn,
Two things, just also mention that as a member of the housing work group, I'm a little nervous about the idea that I think you made a comment, we're gonna have to really move quickly. I'm just a little afraid that this is a very important topic. I don't know what it's gonna be like, but I hope we can do justice to it and be prompt at the same time, but we've got to do a good job. One other thing is a question. I think during our review of various elements of the comp plan, my understanding, it has been stated that after the public review, when we are given our final tune-up, that commissioners can also suggest a revision. You know, maybe you think of something that is a modification of what's there, or a different way to express something. Is that, I just want to make sure that I understand that is welcome at that time.
If the Planning Commission would like to amend any of the drafts, you can do so all the way up until making a recommendation. So if there's a change in language proposed and the Planning Commission wants to move forward on that, you can do that throughout the process. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
okay, no further questions. Adam, I think you're excused.
All right, thanks.
Our final item of regular business is the Planning Commission bylaw review, second reading. Welcome, Deputy Director Allison Van Gorp.
Thank you. Wow, we're just clicking right along tonight. It's going faster than I expected. Okay, so for the bylaws, I know that a couple of the commissioners have emailed a couple of ideas they may propose for amendments. I think overall tonight, from the staff, we're hoping we can approve the bylaws. I know we may have to talk through a few amendments kind of on the fly here, but I'm hoping that we can get to an endpoint this evening. As Adam was just explaining, we've got a lot of work coming up next year, and it would be great to just knock this off plate so that we don't have to continue working on it next year. The staff memo for this kind of explained we've been working kind of simultaneously with all of the other boards and commissions across the city to try to update everyone's bylaws to be consistent and use this same language. And now that we've waited a few months since we first looked at this, that process is, they've kind of caught up. Each of the commissions has reviewed the bylaws and is in the process of approving them. So we're really looking to maintain that consistency across the board. That's a lot easier from the staff side when people are working with multiple commissions. And, you know, if we ever have questions about how something should work, then, you know, the city clerk and the deputy clerk have consistent information they can provide to every commission. I see a hand raised.
Victor.
So along that theme of consistency, I just want to understand if there are changes that we make to our bylaws tonight, will those changes flow to the other, commissions, or will we just remain outliers and will we break the consistency?
Hey, Andrea, do you want to answer that?
Good evening, Commission. For the record, Andrea Larson, your city clerk. To address Commissioner Rashis's question, it would depend on the amendments that are made. As Allison stated, the goal of the bylaws update throughout all of the boards and commissions is consistency. It's consistency for staff, but it's also consistency for our volunteers. It sets an even playing field of how our boards and commissions function. So it would just depend on what amendments are proposed.
Okay,
I also just wanted to say, the bylaws aren't set in stone. Part of the bylaws, it says that they can be amended by the commission kind of on an as needed basis. So if 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, the commission at that time determines that something isn't working well, or, a change is desired, that is something that the majority of the commission could approve. So, I think the way that I've been approaching this is, the staff have actually done a lot of work behind the scenes to produce kind of the best draft we could. It's worked through all these different commission processes. I think there's, I don't know how many boards and commissions, 8 or 9 or something. There's a lot. So, we've been doing a lot of work to try to move these all forward simultaneously, and, fully recognizing that's not a perfect process. There's things that could be improved, I'm sure, either in the process or in the draft. But hopefully we're at a point that's close to good enough, and it would make sense to, just adopt these so that we can have an updated version, and then we can see how they work over time. And if additional changes are needed going forward, those can be made when they're identified. That's really all I needed to present, and I see there's at least one more question.
Angie,
I'd like to make a motion to accept the bylaws as presented.
Second.
Second. No. Beat me.
any discussion, or do we want to go through
I'd like to,
different issues in the bylaws?
I would actually like to discuss my motion. Thank you. I'm making the motion to accept as presented, recognizing that I did review suggested edits and changes. I think one of the comments I'd like to make in support of the motion is, as a stakeholder, as a public engagement person, and as a commissioner, I recognize that the bylaws and the consistency in the bylaws are structured to help this city and help this commission maintain what I'm going to call a consistent standard of public transparency. So, for example, the no surprises rule, the 48-hour notice, all of those recommendations in the bylaws are actually by design to emphasize and encourage the most public transparency we can provide. It's consistent across other jurisdictions in the state. As someone who uses the public process often elsewhere, I rely on that to help make sure I'm prepared for meetings such as this. As a commissioner, I rely on it because, for example, with these bylaws discussions, we've had this version for the most part since July. We've been warned in September, October, and November that this meeting was coming, and we've had ample opportunity to provide edits. That having edits provided less than 24 hours in advance, actually, the reason why the bylaws exist help to manage the workload that we as volunteers have. And so I'm actually in support of a structure that helps me do my job for the city and also helps the public maintain their transparent gaze into the work that we're doing.
Carolyn.
I really appreciate the work that the staff have done to improve these bylaws and the desire to make them consistent. And I think they're very close to being what they ought to be. I continue to have some concerns about constraints placed on an independent deliberative body to have to notify the staff in advance that they may have concerns about something or issues about something. I mean, everything about being on a planning commission is concerns and issues. I don't think it's realistic for commissioners to feel constrained to contact the staff and tell them about concerns and issues they have with what's on their plate. And that's what these communication requirements have of us. So I think it's something important to amend. I also agree that, you know, having an expectation of, you know, good communication in advance of meetings, but we have two different versions in our draft bylaws at present, and they say different things, different expectations. So I do think it'd be worth it to take a few minutes tonight to clear up that inconsistency and to take something which is generally a best practices encouragement sort of requirement, and, you know, make sure that that's what it says and try to not call that a rule. I think we are all, there are certain levels of performance that we have to meet as commissioners or we get booted off. You know, that the bylaws are pretty clear about that. But the assumption we will all do our very best to be the best commissioners that we can. But sometimes I can't be as good of a commissioner as I would like to be. I try as hard as I can. But to say that a commissioner cannot bring up an amendment at a meeting, it practically negates my ability to function as a commissioner. In fact, we are, as we have conducted business for, you know, as long as I can remember, we do bring up amendments the very night that we are there, and some of them are significant. So to say that we can't do that and to call that a rule, I think is really an affront on an independent deliberative body. I do agree with the idea of including it in the bylaws as a firm statement of encouragement. And I would also encourage that the two sections of our bylaws that deal with this be consistent. If you got to have two sections, they should just say the same thing. So this is why I would not be in favor of adopting as is right now.
Adam?
I completely agree with everything Commissioner Boatsman has raised. To address Commissioner Batazzo's note that we've had this on our plate for a few months and we could have proposed changes, we did discuss this topic of some internal inconsistencies, but I don't believe any of that was flowed into these bylaws. I'll reiterate, I think there's a lot of good work here and it's almost there. And I'm not okay with good enough. We should strive for excellence. This is our chance. The idea of, you know, signing off on it now, rubber stamping it and fixing it later, as Adam Zach has shown us, our plate's pretty full next year. So let's get this right the first time. Being externally consistent with the other boards is a good idea, but not at the cost of being internally inconsistent. So I am not ready to rubber stamp these bylaws as is, but I think we can get there quite quickly. It's really good and almost there. I see one big inconsistency and one or two clarifications that I'd like to see.
Chris?
Yeah, can I ask Allison a question?
Go ahead.
Allison, I was a little confused. Sounds like you're inclined that we adopt these as is, and I got the impression from the note that went around, and you know, I forwarded that there were some changes I suggested that you thought were good ideas. So I'm just trying to square those two. I mean, if your thought is that at the end of the day, getting it done with and we'll worry about it later is more important than trying to fix some of these little things that I pointed out, I guess I'm just trying to understand where you're at.
I'm fine with making some, you know, minor amendments tonight, particularly things that seem like good ideas to clarify language or improve a section or something like that. That's fine. I think what I was hoping to avoid tonight was either a really long, confusing conversation that we're not able to easily track and record all the amendments in real time, or having to carry this over to another future meeting.
I guess my question is a little different. Which would you prefer? Would you prefer them as is or with the little amendments?
I mean, I guess I'm don't have a clear preference on that.
Agnostic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further discussion? I believe there's been a motion that's been seconded to simply approve these as written without further amendment. Deb, do you want to call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Boatsman,
Nay.
Commissioner Gales,
Nay.
Vice Chair Brigham,
Nay.
Commissioner Accused,
Aye.
Chair Murphy,
Nay.
Commissioner Rishis,
I'm
and Commissioner Batazzo.
Aye.
Motion fails. 3-4.
Okay, so let's take up any questions or issues. I have a couple of questions which we'll address at the end because they're at the end. Mostly clarification. Do we have an amendment proposal to put on the table? Carolyn?
I have two amendments to offer this evening. One has to do with the communication that is encouraged prior to meetings. And one concerns the commission receiving a copy of the transmittal of our decisions to the city council. I'll take the first one first. I'd like to explain why well, let's see. I guess I should make the motion first and then explain why. Is that what you would prefer, Chair?
I think that it would be appropriate for you to
Okay.
make the motion and maybe break those things up so we can take them one at a time.
Sure. Okay. I propose to replace section 6.5 and appendix C number 7 with the following text. Timely communication. Commissioners should contact staff as far in advance of a meeting as possible to ask questions or to request information not already included in the packet. Commissioners are encouraged to provide substantial amendments to commissioners and staff prior to 48 hours before the meeting.
Seconded.
Okay. Carolyn, you want to speak to it?
Sure. My first reason is I think it is an inappropriate constraint on the independence of the commission as a deliberative body to be required to contact the staff if they have concerns or issues prior to a meeting. The second reason is that the commission continually deliberates amendments that are presented for the first time in meetings, and many of them are substantial. I think it would tie our hands to avoid consideration of amendments that have not been shared prior to 48 hours before the meeting. I don't think we can quite do that. However, I'm very much in favor of including the encouragement in the bylaws that, you know, they are encouraged to share these big ideas in advance with prior to 48 hours. Certainly a commissioner who wants to be successful is going to submit big things in advance. And that's just, you know, the way it can work. The third reason is that the draft contains two sections that don't say the same thing about the same topic. So the things that are not consistent are who to contact, for what purpose, with what degree of constraint, i.e., is it mandatory or is it a should or is it a encourage, okay? And then the when, how soon do you need to do that? Those are the things that are not in agreement with the two sections. And then the last thing I will say is that I think it's best not to call something that consists of best practices a rule, which is why I suggest to change the heading to timely communication. So those are my reasons for proposing the paragraph that I proposed And I would suggest that that paragraph says it all and could be put in place of 6.5 and in place of C7.
Okay, any discussion further on that? Angie,
I think this discussion is illustrating a point I'm trying to make about commission business and other commissioners as volunteers receiving information in a timely manner. The city has a process through which they have to engage in order to be transparent, provide information online, make sure that the public has access to it, at least at the same time or in advance, and that we as commissioners have access to reviewing things in advance. I agree with Commissioner Boatsman that this commission will debate pieces in real time at meetings. That is the purpose of some of these commission meetings. But in this case, for example, this is a case where if it's an exception because we're in real time debating things that are unfolding in front of us and we don't have 24 or 48 hours, where we actually have plenty of time to make the recommendations, to have the conversations and discuss, it seems to be, if nothing else, a practice of decorum to ensure that we're able to have those discussions in a timely manner. And 24 hours in advance when we've had information for 4 months to review does not feel actually like good decorum in practice. I understand the resistance to wanting to feel like it's a rule, but I actually believe it's a best practice. It's not unique to this commission or even Mercer Island. It's government wide, and it's intended to support the public and us as volunteer commissioners. And so I actually don't want to be consistently receiving information 24 hours in advance that I could have received a week or a month ago and been able to come to this meeting ready to vote on or ask for clarifying questions well in advance versus meetings that extend into 10, 11, or 12 o'clock or have to have a special meeting because we weren't able to do our work in a timely manner. So I appreciate more structure. If we have an objection to the word rule, I'm fine with that, but I actually think it's an important part of me being also able as a volunteer commissioner to function and to the public to give them ample opportunity and to our city partners to make sure that they meet their transparency requirements.
Victor.
So I'll say +1 to what Commissioner Battazzo just said. I'm not going to reiterate what she just said, but I do agree with it. What I will add is an illustrative example of why I think this rule is important. I have seen this rule either before it was put in place or when it was broken by the city council, where there was a budget discussion that went on for months. And at the final vote for that budget discussion, which happened, let's say after 10 o'clock at night, most of the public wasn't paying attention. In fact, I think I was probably the only person watching the meeting and hung in there. Suddenly a random amendment came in that had never been discussed and was voted on and passed in the dead of night. I think that's not about city staff, that's not about city council, or in this case, this commission. This is about fairness and transparency for the public so that the public knows what is going to be discussed. I think we owe that to the public, and I will not be supporting this.
Chris.
My thinking, I guess I'm not sure what substantial means in this context. I mean, the kinds of things that I guess Carolyn's amendments, not sure I see those as substantial amendments of the kind that would be covered by this. And if that's the case, I mean, things are going to come up, but if something's really a big deal, I mean, something completely unknown, or as Victor described, maybe that should have, a more, prescriptive regime around it. But I guess I've just lost a little bit in what substantial means.
Adam.
Well, I can appreciate Commissioner Ashis's concern with City Council dropping a new amendment at the end of a long meeting. That's City Council. We're Planning Commission. We advise City Council, so hold them to a higher standard or a more structured standard. When we're dealing with, let's say we get our agenda packets the Friday before a meeting, someone's on a long weekend and they come back late Monday night. You can't expect them to review those documents and look for any errors. We had some long discussions on the marina regulations that it only became apparent something was missed or a discussion was misinterpreted, only when that agenda packet came out, and that resulted in us what I would think is a significant amendment that was approved by our commission. So as I said, perhaps Commissioner Ashis's concern could be resolved by more structure at the City Council, but we need that flexibility to discuss things and correct any last minute misunderstandings.
Okay,
Hi, yeah, I don't know if any hearts or minds are going to be changed here by anything you want to say. But I just wanted to say that while I definitely share Commissioner Boatsman's concern in reading the language, and I'm having my Zoom is doing weird things and it's flickering, having some screen issues. I apologize. But when I'm reading C5 as amended, I'm reading the word use best efforts. And when I'm reading C7, I'm seeing the word encourage to. And to me, that language is soft. And to me, that language gives us the opportunities that we need. It gives us some flexibility. It doesn't say you have to, it says anyhow, I think it's pretty soft. And I think in this case, consistency is more important than exactitude. Consistency with others is more important than exactitude of meaning.
Carolyn.
I didn't want to speak if everyone hasn't already, so I know, Chair, you haven't had your chance to speak yet, so I will wait.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I apologize that I did not provide my amendment sooner. I know that for my own personal life, I did the best I could. It's kind of ironic to be considering my amendment, which was provided today at a meeting in which we're considering the bylaws and how prompt you are in providing this to your fellow commissioners. But I know that I'm satisfied that I did the best I could. And I regret, I would have liked to be a better commissioner in this regard. However, I did try very hard to make my amendments very clear, sort of very simple for you to review. And I hope that was taken note of. What I'm faced with is the commission will just have to decide whether this is something that they can accommodate with the amount of time that they had to look at it under this situation. In regards to decisions taken by a commission like ours or the City Council, where someone makes proposes an amendment and there's a decision made rather quickly about something, I mean, that's just how things go sometimes. I mean, the amendments that a commissioner or a council member might make, those are not provided to the public in advance. It's not like if the public is not watching at 10 o'clock, they would have known that this amendment was coming. So I just really think this is democracy in action. And so I think we do need to take actions based on the amendments that we come up. What is substantial? I think most people know what substantial means. And I think it's reasonable in a bylaw to use that word. I think it's good enough for something that is a guidance. In regards to whether we were to say encourage or best efforts, I would certainly welcome a friendly amendment to make it say best efforts rather than encourage.
So I think this is an interesting issue. When I read Carolyn's proposal, I originally thought, this seems reasonable. Then I went back and studied 6.5 some more. I think the issue here breaks not on the question of best efforts to give advance notice of questions or concerns, but on the issue of how far in advance is one supposed to present substantial amendments, which I take to mean not things that are being done on the fly based on developments, but major items that you want to bring forward. And so while I agree with Carolyn's concern completely that this should not be read or should not be allowed to bar people from addressing emergent issues in the course of a hearing, I do think it does provide, I think Angie used the word decorum, it does provide a better framework than the language that Carolyn's provided. And it does establish more rigor. And frankly, as chair, I'm not going to be preventing people from making amendments on the fly as issues emerge, because I don't think this language is intended to address that. This language is intended to provide a reasonable structure for us and to provide a reasonable level of respect. What this boils down to really is a matter of respect, that we respect each other's time. And I recognize Adam's comment that, you might not have that opportunity. And, there's going to be circumstances where people are going to be excused from this. But I do think we want to have some kind of official decorum that we will adhere to and proceed from there. So I have this heart and mind has been changed by the comments and by the discussion, because frankly, I was initially in favor of it. But I think that this is something that we can definitely live with, and it, at least as long as I'm chair, will not be administered in a way that's either draconian or unfair. Carolyn.
Just a quick question. It concerns what you were just talking about. With this bylaw, the way it's worded, will a chair be able to say, this amendment was not proposed, this amendment, which is substantial, will not be entertained this evening because we didn't know about it prior to 48 hours?
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Well, I know you're saying that you won't do that, but essentially, I think that any commissioner can raise that point and say, this should not be discussed this evening. How will that be handled?
Well, I assume there would be a vote of the commission and decide whether it should be fairly entertained given the exigent circumstances. Okay, any further thoughts, Adam? Oh, okay. Deb, do you want to call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to reread the motion? Or are we comfortable with me just taking the vote?
Can you reread the motion, please?
Okay. The motion is identical to what was emailed out earlier today. I have a motion by Boatsman, seconded by Commissioner Regeb, to replace section 6.5 and C.7, which is appendix C.7, with, quote, timely communication. Commissioners should contact, excuse me?
I didn't need the whole thing read. I just needed to know which one we were talking about. Sorry.
Okay, my apologies.
I would appreciate having
apologies.
it read.
Okay.
Could we get it read?
Commissioners should contact staff as far in advance of a meeting as possible to ask questions or to request information not already included in the packet. Commissioners are encouraged to provide substantial amendments to commissioners and staff prior to 48 hours before the meeting, unquote.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bottazo,
Nay.
Vice Chair Regab,
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rashis,
Nay.
Commissioner Gels,
Nay.
Commissioner Accuse,
Nay.
Chair Murphy.
Nay.
The motion fails 5-2.
Okay. Okay. So I have a question, Allison, if you're,
Sure.
so 6.7 has a statement in the second sentence and talks about ex parte or appearance of fairness in quasi judicial proceedings. And then there's a semicolon, and then it goes on, talks about requires a hearing to be fair and impartial, prohibits participation of anyone who has a conflict, interest, etc., and ends that paragraph. Do I understand this correctly? That's only, all those are referring to quasi judicial proceedings?
Yes, I believe
That
that's
is correct, Chair Murphy.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Carolyn, did you have another motion? Oh, yes, Carolyn, go ahead.
I would like to move that Appendix C10 be amended per the text that I sent earlier. I will read how it will go, but I presume that the city clerk, or I mean that the deputy city clerk has this written down, so I will read it rather promptly. Okay, maybe to make it easier, I'm gonna reword this to make it simpler for everyone. I recommend, or I propose to amend Appendix C10 to add a sentence to the very end of the paragraph. The sentence is, staff will provide a copy of the transmittal to planning commissioners.
Seconded.
Carolyn, you want to speak to your motion?
Sure. I think that this would be an important provision, that the commissioners be provided with the document that presents their decisions they've just made to the council. I think it's a valuable general reference, and it reminds us of the recent work we've just completed. And it also enables us to gain an understanding of how our deliberations are described when they're shared with the council. It's a pretty simple step, and I think it's really valuable to us to have that as soon as it happens.
Okay, so I have a question for you before we, it's not clear to me when you're talking about that being shared. The preparation of that memo is an iterative process. And so I assume that you're proposing that it's to be transmitted when it is ready to be transmitted to city council, when it's final and transmitted to city council.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm just proposing that the transmittal, that we receive a copy of it. That's it.
Okay.
That's all I've said.
So would you entertain a friendly amendment to say when it is transmitted to city council? Just to be clear.
Sure, sure.
Adam's good with that, okay. Allison?
I just wanted to note that the planning commission members are all on the city council packet distribution list. So when those items are transmitted to council, you are already receiving links to them.
Carolyn, does that
Yeah,
satisfy you, or do you want something more specific than that?
I mean to have my hand up, yes. It's true, we can go into those packets and find those transmittal letters, but I don't think it's common, as busy as we all are, to take a look at the city council agenda. We don't know when the topic that we have been deliberating on is going to be in a particular packet. We wouldn't know which one to look at. And then if we go in and we find that particular city council meeting, scroll down their whole agenda and find something we worked on, then there's probably 6 or 7 attachments to that topic. And you got to go through and figure out, well, I wonder if one of these is a transmittal from the PC. Well, I don't think that's very convenient. And I don't think I really think this is something we deserve for as hard as we work, to get this little transmittal just sent to our email and make it really convenient.
Hey,
I think Angie was before me.
oh,
I removed my hand.
Oh, okay. I was just curious. This is just a curiosity question for Allison. I do find the letters through that transmittal method, and I'm kind of tracking what the city council is doing, mostly just because I'm wondering always what's happening with the housing work group and whatnot. So I do look at those agendas. So it is not inconvenient for me. I understand the frustration of having to dig, and I'm wondering, Allison, I know we have Outlook, but do we have the opportunity to have a SharePoint site for the commission? Because I think a SharePoint site would be really a fantastic way for, and I don't know if this is more work or less work for staff. I assume that you could just forward to and sync them. If you guys are using Office 365 online, this is getting really, really into the weeds. But I think there might be an easier way to manage this that actually covers a lot more than just this, because having to dig through emails to find attachments, what version and stuff like that is kind of a pain in the neck just generally. So I like the spirit of what Carolyn's saying, and that having it be more convenient, especially considering we're all very busy volunteers. But I do think we are already receiving it in that transmittal, and I'm wondering if it wouldn't be better to just have a SharePoint site for everything that we do.
I know that we do have SharePoint software. The city's not currently using it very extensively, so that would definitely be a new thing for us. I'm also not sure how that would comply with public records requirements and stuff. I think if we're just putting copies of things in there, probably okay, but it would have to be pretty limited how it was used.
Yeah, I was just thinking a final document archive.
so Allison, are you saying it's probably easier to just send?
I mean, at this point, it would be easier to email something than to set up a new SharePoint website or something.
Deb?
Thank you, Chair. Deputy City Clerk Deb Estrada. I just want to speak from a record standpoint. One of the things that we emphasize across the city with staff and everyone else is not duplicating records and the location of various records. Because when we respond to records requests, we are technically required to provide all responsive records regardless of duplication. So if we have this letter in the council packet in a folder that maybe Deputy Director Van Gorp is keeping on her drive, It's also in an agenda packet. Now we're putting it in a SharePoint, or it just adds another location that we have to manage from a responsive, responding to records requests. That's just one element that I wanted to share, so.
Yeah, that's really a good point. Thank you. Victor,
Just a quick follow-up question to Deb. Does that also apply to the email, the extra email that's being suggested here?
Yes. Yeah, if somebody asks for all communication and all copies, yeah, it would include that as well. And going back to the concern around or it being in the packet, I just wanted to point out that when it does go into the council packet, at least during the short time that I've worked with you all, and Deputy Director Van Gort can correct me if I'm wrong, but staff usually notifies the commission their intentions of sending a letter of recommendation from the Planning Commission to the council and what meeting it'll be going to council. For instance, like the docket that was on Let's Talk. It was in all the communications that it was scheduled for the December 5th meeting. And then one of the things that we have always done as staff when we put out an agenda is we link to what is called the HTML packet. And we do that because rather than giving you one lengthy PDF that could be hundreds of pages long, we want to give you an HTML packet that breaks down the documents that are attached to each given item within agenda to make it easier for people to find those. So you'll have like the cover agenda bill from, in this case, a staff report from Deputy Director, and then you'll have the various attachments that support that agenda bill. So we try to make it as easy as possible for the public to navigate the agenda and find things quickly.
thanks. That's very helpful. Carolyn.
Maybe a good way to address this would just to have it be included in our next packet. I consider the transmittal letter to be planning commissioner work. I mean, it's completed by our chair. So to that extent, I feel it is something that should be in our packet. So is that something that would address some of the concerns that the deputy city clerk brought up?
I mean, it is creating the same issue of adding more copies of a record that she mentioned.
So is your goal then to not have a record be in two meeting agendas or something like that?
Right. The goal is to have things in as few locations as possible. So if it's already in the council packet, we try to just, use links or direct people there to find it.
Well, perhaps we could get simply an email from staff with a link when one of the topics we've been working on is in the agenda for the city council. Just as a favor to us. In this agenda, you will find agenda item number 10 is the thing we worked on, and then we could just link to it. That would solve it, I think.
Yeah, strikes me as more work for staff, not less.
Oh, it is more work. Yeah, definitely more work. That's for sure.
I think your first idea was actually better, Carolyn. That is just put it in the next meeting packet.
I'd like to see it that way, but I guess they're saying that is against their protocol. So I think maybe just a friendly email. I think this gets around it. If we were just to be alerted by one of the staff, one of your issues is at the council, this meeting, here's the transmittal. Here's the link to the meeting. I don't know. Can that be done? Something? Because it takes me 15, I wouldn't think to go looking and know where to look. And it's just, I don't think it works very well as is. Any suggestions?
Oh, sorry, Carolyn.
Okay, done.
Kate.
Sorry.
I was just gonna, we just Microsoft Teams pretty extensively in my workspace, and we use it to avoid duplication of records. And it's a matter of syncing files, so there isn't a second copy. And if the planning staff is ever interested, I would be very happy to give a quick tutorial in Teams. So just putting that out there. I think any suggestion that they inform us about this beyond what the council's being informed is going to be a duplicate record of some kind. And I don't think we should go there.
Angie.
I think I just struggle with the discussion because I feel like at all of the commission meetings I've participated in, staff have been very clear, particularly in the deputy director's report, about when we can expect to see the results of our work at council. Being copied on council agendas, I have consistently clicked on it. For instance, the report we're talking about that Chair Murphy submitted to council regarding the docket. I personally clicked on it, went looking for it and reading it to make sure I felt like it accurately characterized our conversation. And I recognize that when I was doing it, I did think, oh, why didn't I get a chance to see that? And then I realized that's the chair's job. I did my job. If I have any particular issues about it, I can bring it up with Chair Murphy, which I didn't. I'm sensitive to not creating more work for staff, given all the work we're asking each other to do. And I also recognize that redundancy is an issue with government. It's an issue that most people have with government in terms of lots of redundancy and slow decision-making processes. And so I simply just don't want to add more to staff's plate when I feel like I've got all the resources in front of me.
Oh, you're on mute.
Question for clarity on existing processes. Does the distribution of the one large PDF and the creation of the separate HTML agenda, does that already create a duplicate records issue that we've been discussing?
It's all done electronically. The PDF is made from the HTML. The HTML just provides links to within the PDF.
Okay.
So, and the nice thing about having things on the website electronically or linked out there is that if there is a records request, we simply link them to that spot instead of going into our various drives and locating other responsive records that are duplicates of what's already on the management software.
Got it. And is it, maybe perhaps to avoid the duplication issue and make it easier for us to find when those HTML packets are created, could we just have some like phrase we can control F for, like planning commission recommendation?
So you can, of course, if you open a PDF,
right.
you can
No,
do
I meant from
Control F
the,
and do that same thing. I don't think Control F will work with an HTML packet.
or I meant like on the, anyway, just throwing ideas out. Yeah, I don't want to get
Sure.
into
Yeah.
Vice Chair Regeb, you could use Control F to find the item on the HTML page where the agenda is posted. Then if you click on the agenda bell, which is always the top item in there, right on the first page at the top of the agenda bell, it lists all of the exhibits, which would then give you the exhibit number to click on to find the Planning Commission recommendation.
And I always do label it Planning Commission recommendation, so that should be very clear.
Okay, any further discussion of the proposed amendment? Deb, do you want to read the proposed amendment, including the change that was accepted?
Was Commissioner Hughes going to say something? I thought I heard her. Okay. I have a motion by Commissioner Boatsman, a second, which was seconded by Commissioner Regeb. Appendix C10 to that Appendix C10 be amended to add a sentence to the end of the paragraph stating, quote, staff will provide a copy of the transmittal to planning commissioners when it is transmitted to city council.
Okay, let's call the roll.
Okay, Commissioner Gills.
Aye.
Chair Murphy.
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes.
Nay.
Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rashis,
Nay.
Vice Chair Regeb,
Aye.
Commissioner Batazzo.
Nay.
Motion passes 4-3.
Adam,
I've got one requested clarification two requests for clarification and one typo I'd like to bring up in section 6.4 if appropriate.
you may.
All right, so if we go to 6.4, I'll go to the typo first. We have two sections, Bravo. We have 6.4 Alpha, Bravo, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. I'd just like to request that we, change it to Charlie, Delta, Echo and remove the second B. That's the easy one. In the first, as delivered, section 6.4 Bravo, when we're talking about dissenting vote, where we have the ability to state the reasons for that, I would like to propose a motion to add language to, well, I'll move that we add language to the first 6.4 paragraph to clarify when those reasons for voting for a dissenting vote be stated immediately after the roll call, as opposed to at the end of the meeting.
We'll second that.
I'm going to ask if I could please that you repeat that motion. It was, and if you'll give me just one moment. I'm kind of a format Nazi, so okay. Clarify reasons for voting.
Clarify reasons for a dissenting vote after the roll call is taken, in order to clarify that it's not done at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
Is there a second for that?
Oh, I seconded already. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Discussion. Adam, you want to speak to it, or have you?
I mean, if someone wants to state the reasons, we ought to clarify when they can state them, and if it's an early dissent, it's an early vote. It's ambiguous, so let's remove that ambiguity.
Any other comments, Carolyn?
I have two questions, or well, a question. Is the language that you have in your motion, Adam, is that the actual language that you want in the text? Or are you asking for a concept to be implemented? And could we get the text up on the screen, please, so we could see what we're talking about, please?
Yeah, I just meant it as a concept. I didn't.
I see.
I didn't. This is a surprise amendment, right? But hopefully not substantial. We're still allowed. We're still allowed, right?
Deb, are you
but yeah,
able to share screen and show what you've got there?
Are you all looking at the screen with me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could we read the amendment again so we know what number it goes with, or?
I think it would be helpful to try to get an actual revision on the table here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Commissioner Regeb, if you could walk me through where you envision this amendment being made to.
Sure. I would go for line 4 of 6.4 I would say such statement shall be made immediately after roll call is taken and noted in the minutes, blah, blah, blah. So we want to move noted. We want to make that insertion before the word noted.
made immediately after roll call is taken and noted in the minutes.
Take out the first.
And
note.
then scratch noted before it.
You've got two notes.
Just before your
Oh, two
revision.
noted. I'm
Yeah.
with you. My apologies. Okay.
Okay, I'll second that if that's what the motion is at this point.
Okay. Kate,
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my headset. Aren't we, to me, like the discussion happens before we vote, and once you vote, you're done. This sounds like it's opening us up to more discussion or dissenting talk after roll call is taken.
I think the way this would work is the vote would be taken and then the member would need to indicate, I would like the record to show that I dissented from this vote because blah. It would need to be brief because we would literally be writing that sentence down into the minutes.
Okay, so it's already written in the way, I didn't read this right. So we have the right to state, but we usually don't as a practice.
Correct.
Okay, that's just checking. I'm like, we don't ever do this. Thanks.
Chair, I'm sorry, I'm looking for my raised hand, but I've got too many screens open. If I could speak for a moment.
yeah, go ahead.
I'd actually like to invite City Clerk Andrea to join us. She may be more familiar. There is a section that is very specific in the bylaws that may address this. Where I'm going is from a minutes perspective, we don't get into including in the minutes why someone voted for or why somebody voted against. Because at the end of the day or at the end of the vote, it is the action, the approved action that was taken that counts. How one person feels or doesn't feel is not something that's documented in our minutes.
May I respond, Chair?
Go ahead.
I would say Deb nailed it. My brain is very tired. It's been a couple of very long days. This is the spot I remember in the bylaws. This was added because we have had commissioners in the past who wished to state in the minutes why they did not agree with the vote that was made. The verbiage that was presented was verbiage that was drafted by the city's attorney's office. I think the amendment that is on the table is a very good amendment because that is the appropriate time to note dissensions if they have been made.
Thank you. Kate. Oh. You're on mute.
I didn't realize my hand was still up. I'm sorry. Could I call for a vote then?
Yeah, there appears to be no further discussion. So Deb, can you call the roll on that?
I want to add one more thing, if I may. I apologize again. I can't raise my hand. It's not showing up readily. Before you go to a vote, the way this is currently written, it says that the statement that will be made will be noted in the minutes. Which is exactly what both Andrea and I addressed a moment ago. And so I think what you're looking for is such statement shall be made immediately after the roll call vote is taken, along with the record of the vote in the following format. But you don't want the statement to insist that the statement be included in the minutes.
That is correct.
I appreciate the clarification and I would be amenable to that amendment.
Andrea, I'm a little confused because the original document we started with says it's noted in the minutes.
I think what we're running into is we've just kind of created a long run-on sentence. If I could propose a edit to what is on the table, Chair, I would break it into 2 sentences. Statement shall be, let me talk slow, Deb. The statement shall be made,
Immediately after the roll call vote.
yep, immediately after the roll call vote is taken, period.
Let's vote on the one we got.
I'm just trying to provide the clarity of what, so that it's the intent of what they were looking for. And then it shall be noted in the, shall we take in period. The minutes will, sorry, I'm very tired. I'm not thinking my best, Deb, I'm not sure.
The minutes will reflect the record of the vote in the following format.
Yes, that's where I was trying to go.
Chris,
Yeah, I'm with you, Chair Murphy. I'm baffled. I mean, the draft we received indicated that the dissent should be noted in the minutes. You were told that's the uniform standard across all the agencies. I'm not sure why all of a sudden we aren't including that. And, you know, so that's the change. I mean,
The intent of that section was never to include the statement. The statement,
so the
the way
original
that's
thing, it says such statement shall be noted in the minutes. So that was just a mistake in what we received, and you're trying to correct that now.
such a statement shall be noted. Deb, can you turn off track changes? Such a statement shall be made immediately after the roll call vote is taken.
I see.
The minutes will reflect the record of the vote in the following format.
I see. So it wasn't in there initially. I was confused. All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Carolyn,
I've just lowered my hand. Thank you.
okay. Okay. Do we now have something we can vote on? Okay, let's get it done.
Hey, Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Regum,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Commissioner Batazzo,
Aye.
Commissioner Gels,
Aye.
Commissioner Ashish,
Aye.
and Chair Murphy.
Aye. Adam,
I'd like to request one clarification to what is now 6-4 Delta. And this is actually, having watched yesterday's city council meeting, I would like to see if we could quickly clarify that this does not preclude a planning commission member from speaking at city council appearances, you know, in a against or in an opinion that differs from the planning commission recommendation. You know, I see it says lowercase staff resources. Someone could construe that as we can't take those 3 minutes to say why we as a individual citizen may have dissented or disagree with a planning commission recommendation. And yesterday's council meeting presented a great example of that. So I'd like to just clarify that we could still speak to the city council, but not request, you know, formal staff resources.
Yes, my understanding, and either of the clerks can correct me if I'm wrong, any commissioner is welcome to make an appearance at city council. You just need to be clear that you're speaking in terms of your own opinion as a resident and you're not speaking on behalf of the commission.
Carolyn,
You scroll the text up so we can see the section we were talking about, please.
Hold on just one moment. I'm trying to catch up with you all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if you'll please remind, tell me which section we're looking at.
6.4D, I think.
Just go down a tiny bit.
Yeah, there it is.
Thank you.
I, I don't see that as affecting that. But based on what transpired yesterday and in the days before that, I think that it would be appropriate to perhaps have a separate provision in Appendix C, which would address the submission of written material and the sharing of that material prior to the council meeting, so that all the commissioners are aware of that. And if we want to get to that now, or do we want to still talk about D? I don't see D as impeding the ability to talk to council at public appearances. Victor.
So we've had a couple references to what transpired yesterday. I watched the meeting yesterday and I have no idea what you're talking about. Can someone just clue me in?
Well, two things. Carolyn spoke public appearances in opposition to docket item 16, which is fine, which she was totally entitled to do. Carolyn also submitted a lengthy email memo that was sent directly to City Council addressing the same issue without copying staff and without copying anybody on the commission. And I became aware of it only because one of the council members forwarded it to me and requested my comments on it. And so I would think that as a matter of decorum, as we used that word earlier, that it might be appropriate to have a rule that says, hey, if you're going to do that, contrary to a vote of the commission, that you at least inform the commission and inform staff so that that can be circulated to the other commissioners.
Point of order, Chair.
Pardon me?
Point of order.
Sure.
Chair Murphy is being personal about comments that Commissioner Boatsman went to speak to the City Council on as a resident of Mercer Island. Every commissioner here has the ability to speak to the City Council. The commissioners can speak on their own behalf to the City Council and should not have to copy the rest of the commission. I would ask the chair to be careful of your comments.
What I'm talking about is a situation of written material that's being submitted. I don't have any problem with
Deb,
any
can you stop
commissioner
restraining
talking to
here?
anyone. I think there's a difference when people are submitting things to council.
Yes, but a
Can I
resident
get a
of,
clarification? Were the written comments from city email or from a personal email? Because if they were from a personal email, I believe Andrea is correct, but if it's from your city email, which is your official commissioner email, then I think Murphy's comment is appropriate.
comments were from her personal email.
It's from personal? Yeah, then it's wholly
Yes.
appropriate. Yeah, I mean, that's allowed.
Adam,
I believe Commissioner Boatsman's hand was before me.
Carolyn,
Had my hand up for a while. Let me just think momentarily what I was going to say. I guess I was just going to say what Andrea eventually said, which is that my communication with the commission, with the council, was as a individual citizen. So, you know, none of that communication has any place, I don't believe, being discussed right now in this meeting. So.
well, it was based on your experience or alleged experience on the commission, so it appeared to be
Point of order.
in that.
Chair Murphy, the comments that Commissioner Boatsman sent to the city council were sent by her personal email and should not be discussed as to be included in the planning commission bylaws.
I was responding to a question from Victor in explaining why there was an issue or a potential issue. I think that in the interest of transparency, we should be clear on what's being communicated as commissioners. And whether we use our personal email or not, I think it sends a different message when you're speaking as a commissioner. And in the interest of transparency, I think it's a courtesy to all of us. It just happened to affect my issue, but it could affect other issues. And I think that's what's important. What the issue is, how we are perceived and how we are presenting ourselves, and how we are informing ourselves and keeping each other informed. I don't have any problem with personal conversations with council members. That's everyone's prerogative. So, I mean, written record is a different thing. Kate.
I think Adam and Chris were before me.
Adam.
If I may, I could propose some text to my original motion. May I propose some text?
Sure.
Okay. My suggestion for the text amendment or adding to 6.4 Delta would be, this does not preclude a commissioner from communicating as a private resident of the city to the city council through regular public avenues.
Second.
Can I offer amendment to the amendment?
I'm gonna, my apologies, but I'm gonna have to slow us down. So I'm just going to attribute this to exhaustion and trying to keep up with the discussion, but I don't have your original motion.
Original motion was to clarify that 6.4D does not preclude us from communicating as a, with the city council as a citizen. And then I just proposed some text that I wrote off.
I don't think there was an original motion.
There was no original motion. There was
Thank
a
you.
request for
There was a
clarification.
question.
There was
Yeah,
no
so
motion.
no motion, no second, nothing.
I
Okay.
appreciate that. I'm not losing my
Mulligan.
mind.
You're
You're
not
losing
losing
your
it,
mind.
Deb.
Well, not that way. So that's the first motion.
So now restate the first motion since it was an amendment to your question.
Sure. This does not preclude a commissioner from communicating as a private resident of the city to the city council through regular public avenues.
And I seconded that. Could we get the text up on the screen, please?
Were you looking to insert this or put it at the end of Delta?
End of Delta.
Okay, just one moment, please, while I make sure that I am bringing up the right document.
Adam, are you okay with me offering a friendly amendment?
Yeah, let's hear it.
And you don't have to accept it, but my friendly amendment would be that, and this is a practice that I always follow because I've been working for the government for almost 20 years. If I am doing anything on behalf of myself, even if I'm talking to the city of Mercer Island, I would always say I'm an employee of King County, but I'm representing myself as a resident. And I wonder if we don't want to just clarify here, because I think this is what Chairman Review was concerned about. That something to the extent of commissioners should identify themselves as a commissioner speaking as a resident or something like that. Deb, is that just getting way too confusing? But I think it addresses the concerns on the table. Because it's separating me, Kate, as a commissioner from me, Kate, as a resident, and you're clarifying that you're speaking as a resident. And I think that can be helpful.
I know what you're trying to say, and let me check something real quick. One of our appendices, I believe, addresses this.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Kate, what you're proposing is always the best practice and how I would always recommend if a commissioner asks me a question about this, I would always recommend that they identify, you know, I'm on the planning commission, but I'm speaking on as myself as a resident. I'm not representing the views of the commission as a whole. That's always an important disclaimer to make. I think the proposed language here specifying that you're communicating as a private resident speaks to that same intent.
So Allison, is what you're saying that the phrase communicating as a private resident implies that you're identifying yourself as a commissioner that's speaking as a resident? Okay, thank you.
That you're speaking to your own opinion and not to the views of the commission.
Friendly amendment withdrawn.
Chris.
I think the issue that you raised, Chair Murphy, about the getting notice is kind of interesting. And I can imagine if one of us went out and, you know, we all had a rigorous discussion, and then, you know, somebody went to council and was sort of rehashing that with just by themselves. Yeah, I think I'd like to know that that was happening. But on the other hand, I certainly got the point from the city clerk and Kate that that's clearly not appropriate. I guess I was just curious what the basis of that authority is. Is it the bylaws, or is there some city code or state law or the First Amendment? I guess I'm just sort of curious where the normative backing for the notion that we couldn't put in the bylaws something. I don't know if I'd want to put it in there, but I guess I'm getting the impression I shouldn't even think about it. And I just wondered where it comes from that it would be completely inappropriate to suggest that notice be given to the other commissioners.
Every resident on the island is welcome and invited to come speak to the city council. It is my belief that if we put in a notion that if a resident is serving on one of our advisory boards and commissions, that if they wish to speak to the city council on an item that that advisory board or commission has considered on their own behalf, not on the behalf of the planning commission, that it just wouldn't be appropriate to apply those rules. It's not rules isn't the right word. Like Deb said, it's been a very long 2 days.
Okay. So I was just curious if you had anything that was like said, hey, we can't do this.
I don't know the law well enough to speak to where this comes from, but to me, it seems like it derives from the First Amendment and the desire to have a direct one-on-one connection from a resident to their elected official.
And that it might prevent
their ability to speak directly.
It might prevent their ability to speak if they feel that they're going to have to provide that comment. Their comments were for the city council, and that's who they wanted to provide their comments to.
So do we have language there that people are comfortable with? Adam?
Do we need to capitalize city council?
Technically, unless Mercer Island's in front of it, we don't have to, but we as a practice as a city capitalize. So that's just our internal. So thank you. And we also capitalize city. Even when it's standalone. You want me to show you that again?
Please.
Okay.
Any further tweaking that people feel is in order? Carolyn?
One quick, do we need to capitalize commissioner also while we're at it? To be obsessed about it? Okay, thanks.
And for what it's worth, I will do a cleanup at the end, so.
Okay. Call the roll.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Rashis,
Aye.
Chair Murphy,
Aye.
Commissioner Batazzo,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Commissioner Gales,
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Reagan.
Aye.
Thank you.
Are there any other items that we want to address in the bylaws? Deb, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Appendix A, number 7.
Okay. No,
If a
maybe
maker of a
it's-
motion wishes to withdraw their motion, the chair shall ask the commission if there is any objection to the maker withdrawing their motion. If none, the motion is withdrawn. Typically, what we've done is we've asked the person who has seconded the motion if they agree with that. That's been our practice. Should we be doing it this way, or should that be tweaked?
The way I read this, Chair, it appears to be silent on that, but if you do have a motion and a second on the floor, and there's a desire to withdraw that, both the person who makes the motion and the second, as I understand it, need to withdraw.
Right, but this. Oh, okay, I see where that, if the seconder doesn't object, then you're good to go. Okay. Any other tweaks? I know, Chris, you had some things, and the question is that you raised earlier is whether the various items that staff had indicated should be corrected, that you had submitted. Are we still going to correct those or not?
I guess from my perspective, I went through the thing. I think I identified some problems and some improvements. There was some of them that staff apparently thought were okay, but you know, if staff is happy with what they have, and I sort of have a sense that no one else is raising any of these issues or interested, you know, I don't need to be the only one. So I'm not planning to make any amendments unless somebody wants to pick one up.
Seeing none, it appears that do we need a motion to approve that, or have we done that and then just amended it? Or do we need a motion to adopt the bylaws as amended?
I think that would be advisable, yes.
Yeah.
I do see that Commissioner Boatsman has her
Oh, I'm
hand.
sorry. Carolyn,
I was just going to move. I move that we adopt the bylaws as amended.
Seconded.
discussion? Seeing none. Deb, you want to call the roll?
Could I get clarification on who made the second, please? Thank you.
Will you stop your screen share too, Deb?
Yes. Just as finish as I finish typing. Okay, Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rashis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Chair Murphy,
Aye.
Vice Chair Regab,
Aye.
Commissioner Batazzo,
Aye.
and Commissioner Gales.
Nay.
Motion passes 6-1.
Okay. Before we move to other business, I know some of you watched the council meeting last night, and some presumably will, and be able to fast forward through some of the more lengthy parts that we had already seen. But as far as the docket results were concerned, the planning commission's recommendations were, with only one exception, adopted. And so that is a significant achievement, in my opinion. So I think we should be proud of ourselves that we provided valuable input, which was accepted and will be utilized. It may take a while for some of those things to trickle down or trickle back to us. But it was a job well done as far as I'm concerned. The thing that I do think I want everyone to look at is for docket item 18, and we can't discuss the substance of that, but procedurally, docket item 18 is now joined the MICC property is now included as a comprehensive plan map amendment, not rezone, but comp plan map amendment as part of docket item 18. And I know those of you who didn't watch are going, huh? How'd they get there? And I highly recommend that you watch the video so that you understand how that came to be. I think that would be very valuable for going into this process going forward. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Elsa?
I mean, I can give you the 5-second summary of what happened. So Mayor Neese proposed, there's a section of code kind of deep into the docketing procedures that allows the city council to expand a land use map amendment to include either adjacent properties or similarly situated properties. And so he utilized that provision to add the country club property onto the proposed JCC land use map amendment to redesignate it also as commercial office. This code provision does not apply to zoning changes, only to land use map changes. So the beach club, if they would like to move this forward, the beach club will need to make a docket application next year for a zoning change. And it was discussed during the meeting that, you know, given other time constraints, it's likely that this project wouldn't be moving forward until 2025 for review anyway. And so there is adequate time for them to submit that docket application if they wish to do so.
I think you meant country club, not beach club.
Oh, sorry, definitely misspoke there.
Carolyn,
Does that mean that the country clubs, I wasn't sure I heard correctly. Has the country club's docket item been merged with the JCC's docket item? And does that mean that both are now quasi-judicial matters, or is this one quasi-judicial matter at this
So
point?
this consideration of the land use map and the JCC's rezone will continue to be quasi-judicial. And that will begin to include the country club as a discussion of the land use map. However, the country club's other proposal for a temporary use provision was also docketed. So we will continue to review that as a legislative matter.
Okay, I better watch the video.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's
And then-
complicated.
it is.
I just wanted to take this moment, you know, while we're talking about the
They
docket.
called it the belt and suspenders approach.
Yes.
So
I wanted to compliment Allison and thank you, Allison, for the great additional work that you did this year to evaluate every docket proposal against the criteria and give us a head start on that. I think it really helped a great deal, so it was really appreciated.
thank you.
Okay. Allison?
All right,
anything to
I
report?
really don't have a lot to say, but Adam already gave you a bit of an overview of what's coming up next. I hope you all enjoy your holidays, and then we'll be back. Our next meeting's January 24th. We will be talking about the park zone. So part of the comp plan scope is that we should be adding a park zone. So we have begun drafting that. We'll be taking it to the Parks and Recreation Commission for some initial advisory work in January 4th, I believe. And then we'll be bringing their recommendations along with the staff draft for the commission to review at the end of January. Following on that, we'll be, you know, getting into housing and all the other topics of the comp plan. Like Adam said in his presentation, it remains a lot to do in a short amount of time. We're likely to be adding in special meetings, probably meeting twice a month for a few months in a row. I think also following on some of the conversations we had with the bylaws and decorum and how we can respect each other and work together well. I think we can all, you know, do our part to make this next chunk of work go smoothly. It's probably going to be one of the more intense periods of work that we have with the Planning Commission for some time. I mean, we've had projects that were big like this in the past that probably Carolyn remembers. But we've stuck to the once a month meetings now for the past. So I think I'll ask the Planning Commission, please do your homework leading up to our meetings next year, and please do your best to submit those questions early. We've been getting kind of a trend of a lot of questions coming in within a couple, 2, 3, 4 hours before the meeting. And I'll just say from staff's perspective, it's really difficult to respond to numerous questions in that time frame. There's not adequate time. And it's also when we often like to take a break and eat dinner so that we can be prepared for the meeting. So, I urge you and request that you please try to work ahead as much as you can. I totally understand that people have vacations, they get sick, family emergencies come up and you can't always do that. But to the extent that you can, please do your best to do your homework the weekend before and get us your questions on Monday morning. That gives us time to respond before the meeting and, to get you a thoughtful response.
Chris?
Yeah, I think in that spirit, to the extent we can get things before the 5 o'clock on Thursday, because of some time, because, as pointed out, we get thinking Thursday and the weekend's there, and
Yeah.
If we don't turn our attention till Monday, it doesn't give us a lot of time. So, that is the last time, and I feel like most of the stuff that comes in Thursday. So, if you guys have some time and get us to us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, will give us a little bit more time to give you a little bit more time.
Yeah, we will do our best to work ahead. We aim to publish the packet on Wednesday or Thursday before the meeting. If we're able to, we get it out Wednesday. Sometimes it's Thursday. There's been a couple times where it went to Friday. It kind of depends on if the meetings are close together. Sometimes we're up against deadlines, or if we're waiting on something from council, things can get crunched sometimes, but I absolutely can commit that we will do our best. Just like I said, people get sick or there's vacations, but when we can, we will do our best to work ahead and provide materials ahead of time. We tried to do that over the past year when we had drafts coming out of big new sections of comp plan or code, to provide them a month ahead of time so that you had more time to review and submit comments. And that's going to be our practice going forward.
Okay. Next meeting is January 24th. Is there anyone who thinks they're not going to be here?
January.
Okay. Here, Kate,
Are we on other business right now?
yes.
Okay, I'm hoping that we can add to January 24th a question about additional members on the housing committee. And the reason I want to get that on our agenda is because at the initial housing committee meeting, Mayor Neese had said what happens in our meetings stays in our meetings, because we need time to deliberate. And I want to get clarification or know that I can communicate with expertise on the commission if, because as it stands, I don't know that that's allowed in that work group. And I think it would be good to resolve that before that work group reconvenes. So I don't know if that's a question for staff or something that we can address at this, at our next meeting. So I just a request to put that on the agenda in some form or another as city staff feel appropriate.
So I'm a little confused about what you're asking. So first you talked about the number of representatives on the work group, and then you talked about the procedures for the work group. So are you asking about both or one or the other?
I'm asking about both, because if we can't have another member, and I'm not thinking of anyone specifically, but if we can't have another member on that work group, then I want to revisit that, communication decision with that work group.
So the
We have some new
composition,
expertise that could be really valuable to that conversation, and I don't want us to not have access to that resource.
the composition of the work group was set by a resolution of the city council, so we can't add members without the city council's approval.
Okay.
I think we could, if someone wanted to step down, we could replace them. That would be fine. And then I think the procedures or the rules for that work group were decided by the work group itself at the first meeting. So I think the proper venue to address that would be with the members of the work group.
Okay, fair enough.
Carolyn,
I am also concerned about that constraint on talking with people, and thank you, Allison. We will, take it up at that housing work group, but I don't recall ever being in a, commission meeting or, work group where I couldn't go talk to somebody about what's going on. Like if I know somebody who's really knowledgeable about something, is that something that is legal? I mean, can a work group like that throttle the communication of one of its members with other people?
Well, I don't know about that last nuance, but I mean, it's legal
the
for the
problem.
work group to meet and have private conversations. It does not need to be a public meeting because there's not a quorum of either the city council or the planning commission.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so I think it is okay to keep that information private while you're meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We'll continue to look into that. Thanks.
Deb,
Deb,
did you wanna-
I was just going to caution the commission on talking too long about this specific topic that isn't on the agenda. So that was all.
any other thoughts for the good of the order before we close out? Well, since we don't meet before next year, have a great holiday, everyone, and see you all next year. There being no further business to come before the Planning Commission, the time now is 8:40 and the meeting is adjourned. Please stay on screen until city staff has terminated the broadcast.